Well, staying with our top story, the resignation of the entire Social Mobility Commission is a major blow to Theresa May, who on entering number 10 as Prime Minister for the first time, promised to make social justice her top priority. Social Mobility czar Alan Milburn blamed the government's preoccupation with Brexit for the lack of progress on inequality.
I'm afraid I've reached the conclusion that there is little, if any, hope of the current government making progress towards the fairer Britain that the Prime Minister has talked about. The government, perhaps understandably, is focused on Brexit and simply lacks the bandwidth to be able to translate the rhetoric of healing social division and progressing social justice into reality. And I'm afraid I've reached the conclusion that there's only so much that you can do to push water uphill.
Well, joining me to discuss this from Tunbridge Wells in Kent is Phillip, Blond, a former advisor to David Cameron, and from Romford in Essex, Shihab Khan, reporter and columnist for The Independent. Gentlemen, many thanks to you both for joining us this afternoon. Phillip, if I can firstly start with you, is Theresa May failing in her social justice mission?
Well, I think I would argue everybody's largely failed in the social justice mission for the past 30 years or so. These trends have been ongoing in globalization, in the developments of the modern economy for many decades. The OECD now says that inequality in countries is greater than equality between countries. So it's a bit rich of Alan Milburn to accuse this government when he himself is part of the agenda that widened inequality. And I also think that there's something wrong about the language of social mobility. The language of social mobility is part of the idea that, escaping from your area is success. And it sort of implies that those who can't escape are somehow guilty for the fate if they don't escape. And really what I think is on trial is a whole governing philosophy of social and economic liberalism that essentially has created rewards for only those at the top and not those at the bottom. So, no, I don't think Theresa May is terribly harmed by this, but I think the whole governing philosophy of the last 30 years has, I think, been called into question. And I think that's really what May did speak to. And I myself argued in numerous points on your programmes and in print that actually the real danger for May is Brexit would divert her from the social justice mission. And it's also a bit rich of Alan Milburn to accuse the government of trying to carry out a democratically mandated outcome and then not having the bandwidth. That's hardly their fault. And you might argue this precisely wasn't the time to quit. But I do agree that the issues of inequality are real and oppressing. And it is true that we don't have at-scale answers to them. But again, I think Milburn's wrong. Devolution, which we at Res Publica first argued for with devolution to Manchester, is part of the deep structural change that's needed to, for example, educate the unskilled and drive resources back into the north.
OK, then I'm just going to bring in Shihab here. So Shihab, what Phillip is essentially saying that it is not the Prime Minister's fault. There are other factors at play to why there are serious concerns about social mobility.
There certainly are other factors at play, but we cannot discount the effect that austerity is having on social mobility and inequality. There's no way you can ignore that. Food bank uses have gone up. Real wages have gone down. Living standards have gone down. That is a direct consequence of austerity. Those are massive issues when it comes to social mobility. We have to look at the last two governments, this government and the previous one, who have been responsible for austerity. David Cameron slashed funding for Sure Start centres. Again, a key problem with social mobility is the fact that we're not funding these programs. We're slashing funding for these programs. Timid investment for affordable homes. People can't get onto the housing ladder. That's a major issue. In this budget, we saw Phillip Hammond free stamp duty. That is not going to help first-time buyers. Every single economic forecast, every single economic conclusion that came off the back of that said house prices would go up and it wouldn't actually help first-time buyers. These are major issues. These are issues that are really preventing social mobility. And the current government and the previous government have gone out of their way to push this austerity agenda, which hurts working class people and people from disadvantaged backgrounds most. If we want to tackle social mobility, if we want to actually do something about it, we need to tackle this inequality. That's why Milburn's resigned. Milburn is essentially saying that We have this rhetoric put out by Theresa May, by David Cameron, but there is no effort and no actual intent to address it.
So, Philip, you're an advisor to David Cameron. Apparently, you gave him the wrong advice when it came to issues such as social mobility.
No, if you go back to my essay that I wrote back for Prospect magazine in 2010, I said social mobility is the wrong answer and it's to the wrong question. The key point is to raise all boats. Social mobility is an escape philosophy, and I think it's a corrupt philosophy. And actually, your previous speaker was wrong. Incomes were stagnating prior to the crash, particularly for the unskilled in the new Labour years. And it's the crash when actually the overwhelming majority of incomes back in 2008 started to stagnate. And actually, far from austerity, what in point of fact George Osborne actually did was end up just tracking Alistair Darling's plan, his great vaunted hope for austerity in terms of radical cuts was never delivered. And Philip Hammond actually loosened austerity in the last budget. So I think everyone's got the agenda wrong, and they're trying to make stupid party political points, when really what we need to make are sort of 30, 40 era points. We've got a form of capitalism that doesn't help people. We've got governing philosophies, both left and right, that aggressively and progressively leaves people behind. And we've created a world in which the asset rich, those who already own, do far better than anybody else. And we've got to look at that governing philosophy, and that is, broadly speaking, liberalism. And we need a post-liberal agenda. We need something that recognises we've got to not have this, oh, if some people escape, we've got equality of opportunity, all is great, which in the end is what Milburn is arguing for. We've got to create a genuinely one nation, pro-poor agenda, and we don't have that on offer from either party at the moment. And I think it is right, and I myself have argued that Theresa May needs to refocus on her social justice agenda. That's imperative. And in part, the government is trying to do it. What it's announced today for children's mental health is unprecedented as an approach. But if we simply try to make party political points, we fail to see the big issue. And that's the real crime here.
So she had points you may or may not agree with. How do we move forward? How do we move on?
Look, I mean, there is a few things there that I do agree with. The system we have at the moment favours those who own assets. That is completely true. The way we move forward is tackling inequality. Inequality is a major issue. We can't have children going to school hungry. That is not okay. That is not acceptable. If we want social mobility, we need to make sure that the kids of our generation have food in their stomachs when they go to school. A cross-party report in the House of Commons found that 3 million children in the UK are hungry during the holidays. That is a major, major problem. What is the solution to that? Theresa May comes up with an idea in her manifesto that she's going to provide breakfast to school children and costs it at 8p a breakfast. That is horrendous. If we want social mobility, there are multiple things we can do. Firstly, tackle inequality, tackle issues like that. Secondly, fund education better. We see spending on education, but the issue that we're having is that there's a major socio-economic divide between the North and the South. That's something that David Lammy highlighted. He looked at the number of students that were getting into the most elite universities in the country, Oxford and Cambridge. There's a major divide there, with certain areas getting in more students than others. We need to tackle problems like that. We need to invest in affordable homes. These are all issues from a wide range of areas that we need to tackle if we want social mobility. Food bank usage, it is horrendous that in this country, the 6th largest economy in the world, that people are having to rely on food banks. Once we address those issues, we'll address social mobility.
Philip, Blond, Shihab Khan, a very interesting topic. Many thanks indeed for joining us, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Conservative MP